Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Janavalabha Girivardhari Gopi Janavalabha Girivardhari Jasharanandana Braja Janaranjana Jasharanandana Braja Janaranjana Jasharanandana Braja Janaranjana Jamuna Tira Vanachari Jamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Vishnupad Paramahansa Parivrajagacharya Sutarasata Sri Srimad The Divine Grace of Bhajanavinda Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jaya Nitilil Bhavishta Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Parivrajagacharya Sutarasata Sri Srimad Divine Grace, Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Goswami Prabhupada Ki, Ananta Koti Vaishnava Brinda Ki, Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki, Go Premanandi. All glory to some of the devotees. All glory to some of the devotees. All glory to some of the devotees. All glory to Sri Guru, Sri Gauranga, and Srila Prabhupada. Reading from Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita, Volume 6, chapter titled, I Have Done My Part. So we'll start with the paragraph. After one day in Vrindavan, Srila Prabhupada wrote, I was staying in Rishikesh hoping to improve my health, but instead I have become a little weaker. Now I have come back to my home, Vrindavan. If anything should go wrong, at least I will be here in Vrindavan. Srila Prabhupada called for Tamal Krishna Goswami. There are two things he said, trying to survive and to prepare for death. It is better to plan for the worst. Arrange to always have 3 or 4 men with me. Have kirtan and read Bhagavatam all the time. Now I am trying to take little food. Parikshit Maharaj would not even take water. Seeing Srila Prabhupada's mood, Tamal Krishna mentioned the need for a will, and Prabhupada agreed. A will, he said, was simple enough. Whatever he spoke, several men could sign as witnesses. He recalled how his spiritual master, just before a hernia operation, had made a very simple will on a scrap of paper. Although he never underwent that operation, years later the same will was presented in court and was accepted as evidence against the plots of some of the disciples. He was the original founder, said Prabhupada, so whatever he wills, that is accepted. When Tamal Krishna asked why Prabhupada's Guru Maharaj had not undergone the operation, Prabhupada replied, everyone has their sentiment. He thought that the doctor was paid to kill him. Yes, said Tamal Krishna, because sometimes people were actually paid off to kill him. Actually, Srila Prabhupada, you and your Guru Maharaj were the greatest enemies of modern civilization in this century. Srila Prabhupada explained, this is Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's mission, Bharata Bhumi Tehaila. This is India's culture. The whole world is in darkness, and they are risking their life in the transmigration of one body to another. He does not know that he is eternal, and that in a few years this fragment is passing away. This life is just a passing flash. This is the Vaishnava's concern. What these rascals are doing, they are jumping like monkeys, wasting time. That is the Vaishnava's compassion, paradukka dukhi. When some other devotees gathered in Srila Prabhupada's room, Tamal Krishna explained Prabhupada's recent decision. So Srila Prabhupada decided that the best medicine would be Srimad Bhagavatam and Kirtan, and no need of any doctors who are promised to help save the life. We shouldn't bring them, and no outsiders. No medicine for the body, asked the devotee. Oh, whatever medicine I am taking, said Srila Prabhupada, Yogendra Ras. He has tried so many medicines, Tamal Krishna said. Every doctor has come, and they have each given their medicine, and he has tried them. This medicine always works, Srimad Bhagavatam and Kirtan. Bhavo Sadach Chotramano Biramat, quoted Srila Prabhupada. He had been quoting it again and again. It pleases the ear and the mind. Bhavo Sadach Chotramano Biramat Ka Uttama Shloka Gunanuvadat. Make glorification of Bhagavan and everyone will appreciate it, except the animal. At Srila Prabhupada's request, Kirtan by a group of no more than 4 or 5 devotees and Bhagavatam readings went on constantly, whether he was in his room, on the veranda, or on the roof. In the morning from 5 to 10 and in the evenings from 3 to 9, he would sit with his eyes closed, absorbed in the Kirtan, the medicine for the disease of material existence, which gives pleasure to the mind and ear. Tamal Krishna promised to Prabhupada he would read him no letters and bring him no visitors. Prabhupada had long wanted this, and now it at least would come to pass. The writing of the will would not be done with the attitude that the end had come, but in the spirit of preparing for the worst. It also meant finishing things so they would not have to be done at the last minute. Prabhupada was concerned that his movement continue securely with all ISKCON properties in the possession of his disciples within the institution, and all his instructions made clear for the future. These matters should be dispatched now in a will, and the GBC men should gather in Vrindavan to make these last arrangements and to be with him. Once these things were settled, Prabhupada would be free to continue writing his books with no worries. Srila Prabhupada ki. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Reading from the Srimad Bhagavatam, 3rd Canto, 14th Chapter, Text 30. Maitreya Vacha Jaivam Samvidite Bhartra Jaivam Samvidite Bhartra Manmaton Matitendriya Manmaton Matitendriya Jagraha Vaso Brahmarsha Jagrahavasa Brahmarsha Vishaliva Gatatrapa Vishaliva Gatatrapa. Please chant. Ayamate Bhatra Manmaton Matitendriya Nagrahavasa Brahmarsha Vrashaliva Gatatrapa Maitreya Vacha Taivang Sabhidate Bhatra Manmaton Matitendriya Jagrahavasa Brahmarsha Vishaliva Gatatrapa Taivang Samidite Bhartra Manmaton Matitendriya Jagrahavasa Brahmarsha Vishaliva Gatatrapa Maitreya Vacha Saivang Sabhidite Bhartra Manmaton Matitendriya Jagrahavasa Brahmarsha Vishaliva Gatatrapa. Ladies. Maitreya Vacha Shaivam Sambhidite Bhartra Manmaton Matitendriya Jagrahavasa Brahmarsha Vishaliva Gatatrapa Aivang Samidite Bhartra Manmaton Matitendriya Nagrahavasa Brahmarsha Vishaliva Gatatrapa Maitreya Vacha. Maitreya said, Sa Shi Evam thus Sambhidite, in spite of being informed, Bhartra by her husband, Manmata by Cupid, Urmatita being pressed, Indriya senses, Jagraha caught hold of, Vasa clothing, Brahmarishe of the great Brahmana sage, Vishali public prostitute, Eva like, Gatatrapa without shame. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. Maitreya said, Diti was thus informed by her husband, but she was pressed by Cupid for sexual satisfaction. She caught hold of the clothing of the great Brahmana sage, just like a shameless public prostitute. Please repeat. Maitreya said, Diti was thus informed by her husband, but she was pressed by Cupid for sexual satisfaction. She caught hold of the clothing of the great Brahmana sage, just like a shameless public prostitute. Purport. The difference between a married wife and a public prostitute is that one is restrained in sex life by the rules and regulations of the scriptures, whereas the other is unrestricted in sex life and is conducted solely by the strong sex urge. Although very enlightened, Kashyapa, the great sage, became a victim of his prostitute wife. Such is the strong force of material energy. Om Mukam karoti vachalam pangum lankayate gurum yat kipatamaham bande Shri Gurum Tirataranam. So it seems from the previous descriptions, although the wife is considered to be the better half of the husband, who shares in all the results of the pious activities, and who maintains the household, frees the husband to perform sacrifice, that in this situation, under the influence apparently by Cupid, the wife has been induced to act no better than a common public prostitute. The analogy here, or the comparison here, is very revealing. One may excuse that the wife was compelled to act by an external agent, Cupid. But Cupid is not so much the forcing the living entity. You've seen the depiction. Sometimes you see Cupid is armed with a bow and a quiver, and he shoots these arrows. So that has some simplistic relation to the situation here, as that the sex urge arises due to circumstances, in this case, the influence of Cupid. But what is that influence of Cupid? Cupid's influence becomes prominent when the mind is weak. It's not a question of the senses being weak. The senses are just like instruments. You don't have a weak hammer. No one says, my hammer's weak and I can't bang the nails. No, it doesn't work like that. But the will behind the instrument has become compromised by something, generally due to repeated exposure to the temptation, Cupid's arrows, so to speak. Just like if you shoot enough arrows into something, it dies. Sometimes one arrow is not enough. Even one bullet is not enough. You have to hit the right spots. So in order to, essentially neutralize the central nervous system, then the body stops moving. Even when you shoot someone, they don't stop because the brain has not stopped. Even though the body is damaged, they keep moving because the brain is still functioning. There may not even be any sensation of pain due to drugs or some other thing. There are stories of people being shot repeatedly and continuing to move forward to continue the attack, because they don't know that their body is finished, because the brain is still alive. But in this case here, we see that the arrows have done their job. We don't know how many arrows Cupid shot in this regard. Doesn't say. Just said by Cupid's pressing, urging. In any case, the result is the same. The deed is done. And now it just remains to be seen what kind of demoniac offspring will come. Of course, we already know. As we mentioned, this is all Krishna's Leela. This is not ordinary. But for our benefit, it's like with the case of Haridas Thakur. Here, and Prabhupada makes this analogy earlier, that Haridas Thakur, simple young man, chanting alone, approached by, again, a conspiracy in order to compromise him, because had he fallen down with that prostitute, he would have been most likely killed. That's their plan. As it was, he was caned. Everyone know what caning means? They beat you with bamboo, these lati. It's not actually bamboo, it's a different type of rattan. Lati. He was caned in 22 marketplaces. Essentially, he was sentenced to death. But even his captors, even the people who were beating him, they could recognize that there was something special about this person. He never cried out in pain. He only chanted the holy names. And so they were afraid to continue, because they understood at that point that this is a saintly person and we're beating this person. And nothing is happening to him, but yet all this reaction will come upon us. So they were a little intelligent in that regard. So they stopped. But technically he was condemned to death. So in this way, he is obviously a much greater Brahma Rishi than, Kasyapa, who, couldn't even control his senses, control his wife's senses. Because it's not a question of controlling his wife's senses. He has to control his own senses. He just had to say, even though he's begging, wait a few more seconds. No, he couldn't even do that. This is, again, for our benefit. Not that we hold these people in disregard as part of the pantheon of personalities who have simply, by their examples, have given us the means by which we can pursue spiritual life armed with knowledge. Otherwise, of course, the animals are there also to teach us. Until we went to India, no one ever understood the analogy, the example of the ass being kicked in the face by the she-ass when he approaches for sex. But when you go to India, you see all these things. And it's amazing, actually, you don't want to get kicked by a mule or a donkey or a jackass. It can be fatal. Sometimes you'll see pop up on your feed in Facebook some thread, some video of somebody being kicked by a horse or an animal like that. This is very dangerous. But the ass is being kicked repeatedly in the face when he approaches the she-ass for sex. And it's just inconceivable, actually. But yet, so these examples are there for our benefit, no doubt. And Prabhupada used it on many occasions, along with the chewing the chewed example. We never saw a sugarcane machine. We had no idea what chewing the chewed meant. Matirna Krishna Paratak Svatova, Mito Vipadyeti Grahavatanam, Adanta Gobir Vishtatam Tamisham, Punak Punas Chavata Chavananam. It's chewing the chewed, the animals, the sugar cane walla, he's grinding the cane, and he runs it through once, and then he takes it out, and he runs it through again. He wants to squeeze every last drop. And then he takes it out and he folds it in half and he runs it through again. By that time, usually it's done 3-4 times. And it sits in a pile. And there's no juice left. There's nothing. But the animals don't know that. They come and what they see in their minds is sugar cane. So there's the promise of enjoyment. This is the example. There's the promise of enjoyment. It's no longer there in that empty husk, but they think it's there. And so they approach it and they start to try to chew it. And they're being dumb animals, they'll continue to chew even though there's nothing left in it. So that is our fate if we do not learn from these lessons given by the living entities in various forms of life, illuminated by the self-realized sages who use these effectively to lift up the minds and intelligence of those who are serious on the path to spiritual life. Because if you're serious, you will remember these examples. You won't forget them. They won't go in one ear and out the other. When you're confronted with such temptation, you'll remember, wait, I don't want to be like Kashyapa Muni or like the male ass, or like the foolish animal chewing the chewed. No, but by circumstances, we can say that there's and especially the most important thing is to remain fixed in the association of devotees. Not to just simply depend on your own mind to elevate you. As the Gita clearly says, that the mind is the best friend or the worst enemy. The best friend is not that the mind is simply itself the best friend and that you don't need anything else. No, it's the best friend because it gives you the impetus how to act under certain circumstances, to go and be with the devotees, to put your phone down, and walk away from Maya, and to this is to take shelter when necessary, just like in a rainstorm. You don't stand out in the rain, you seek shelter. And the word ashram means shelter, ashraya. And Krishna himself, this is the spiritual master, ashraya tattva, the external manifestation of the super soul, specifically to give the living entity shelter, from the, what can you say, the all-pervading aspect of the material energy. This is her realm. This is Maya's realm. When Lord Shiva is a very unique personality. And, there's been enough classes lately in this regard. But the fact remains that we have to be very respectful towards the material energy, not by artificially worshiping, not by creating some pandal or some mandap or this, that. Prabhupada mentioned respect in the context when he was asked, or whether he remarked, that one problem, maybe the main problem with his Western disciples, was that they are not enough afraid of Maya. They're not enough afraid of Maya. It's just like when you see the lion or the tiger in the cage and you think, let me put my hand inside. An intelligent man knows that the potential for damage is there. But still you see, foolish people do this all the time. And somehow or other, YouTube is right there to catch it all on film. You see foolish people doing this thing all the time. And you wonder, how can they be so foolish? How is it possible? But that is the nature of the living entity. He's compromised. His intelligence is compromised. It's lost. Right? So the only way to maintain your strength in spiritual life is to use your spiritual intelligence on a regular basis, to implement what you have learned, at whatever level you have learned it. It doesn't require you to jump to some high level and expect that everything will be automatically resolved. No, just you start with simple steps that you learn how to, and what does that how does that come about? The word disciple gives the hint. Disciple means discipline. It doesn't mean anything else. It means that, yes, I've accepted voluntarily the order of the spiritual master. That is a disciple. And what is the order of the spiritual master? To rise early, take bath, to attend Mangalarti, to chant whatever your fixed number of rounds is. My godbrother Hamsarupa used to rise at midnight. Rise at midnight. Because out in there, where we were staying, there's no artificial illumination. Far from any, even the villages, it wasn't close by, Goshala. He would rise at midnight and he would begin to chant his rounds. And then he would, and all this time, and he would only be sitting with the cows. He'd just be sitting downstairs, just chanting, like that. In this way, throughout the day, he would manage to chant 64 rounds. But this is not something for everyone to do. But he had the ability to focus that verse, Vyavasaya Mika Buddhya Ekeha Kurunandana. This was essentially his lifestyle, completely focused, no deviation. So one has to have such determination. It's not artificial, but you accrue such ability by constant practice and detachment. This is the key. It's not that we make you come to Mangalarti because we want to see a bunch of tired faces, people moping around on the periphery of the kirtan, because somehow or other I was forced. Hadai Pandit came with the gong in the morning and woke me up. Because that's Hadai Pandit's job. He bangs the gong, 4 a.m. Haribol Prabhu, Jeev Jago, Jeev Jago. But this is the discipline. One has to follow if he wants to make spiritual advancement. It is not artificial. It seems artificial to us due to lack of realization. Otherwise, one is ready immediately to rise once he has that taste. Rasavajam rasopyasya param jusvanavartate. Once he has that taste, he doesn't have. It doesn't matter if he had 2 hours sleep. He gets up because that's discipline. Otherwise you become a victim of the mind. The mind will always have an excuse. 2 hours is not enough. 3 hours is not enough. 4 hours is not enough. 5 hours. So what's enough? For the mind, half a day is not enough. 12 hours, Prabhupada used to comment. In the West, they're accustomed to sleeping 12 hours because he could see that. In the beginning, there was no Mangalarti. Devotees would just kind of get up, Prabhupada was very tolerant. He knew that there had to be some concessions initially. After that, he had to limit them to only smoking twice in a day. Bidi. Who can imagine? But yet, just see how through Srila Prabhupada's expertise, he was able to guide them to the higher taste. Even though we didn't know what it was, he was able to guide us directly to that reservoir of pleasure. So we're very fortunate, unlike Kashyapa. He didn't have a godbrother close by to say, whoa, wait a second, what are you doing? What are you doing? Sometimes persons like Kashyapa are very puffed up. It appears to be the case in this case. They're thinking I'm a very great Brahmana, and I know all the Shastra. We've met such persons on Sankirtan sometimes. They think they know everything, right? And they're hardly in their 20s, but somehow or other they think they know everything. So the problem under the circumstances is that you cannot, if a person is not ready to hear, if they're already think themselves, fully whatever, fully realized, fully educated, then it's very little you can do except give them prasadam. But in this case with Kashyapa, he's a mature individual. I mean, he had such there's so much information regarding his actions, but yet still he finds himself in this situation and he can't defend himself spiritually. So this just goes to show you that it's not scholarship alone. There's nothing to do with it. Brahma Tejas, the wealth of the Brahmana, the power of the Brahman comes from austerity. He's a householder. He's not expected to undergo so many extreme austerities. He's not like the yogi, solitary, within the circle of 5 fires, or up to his neck in freezing water. This is not, he's not undergoing those. He's not doing that. He's surrounded by so many wives. How many wives? 13 wives?
Actually 23 altogether.
Now he's altogether 23?
Yeah, there's 17 from Daksha.
Oh, 17 from Daksha.
From somebody else.
So, there's a very unfortunate situation in one sense. People think, oh no, this is the epitome of material acquisition is to have unlimited sex life, multiple women, to like the public prostitutes here, like it says here. He can at any time of his choosing, he can have sex, and people think this is what some religions promise that, when you reach the heavenly planets, that you're rewarded with, so many virgins at your disposal. That's considered to be heaven, like that. So these things are all, one should learn at least, what is the difference between religion, sub-religion, animal life, and transcendental, self-realization. It should be very easy to see. And through Kashyapa's activities, it's very easy to see that he was not on the path of self-realization. He could have been, and it doesn't say that he was a Brahmavadi, but it says he was a Brahmarshi, a Brahmin sage. What does a Brahmana mean? Brahmana jana titi Brahmana. Means one who knows Brahman, Brahman. But apparently that doesn't help you under the circumstances. At least it didn't help him. If one actually knows Brahman in truth, then his senses are automatically controlled. What's that verse? Yashasti bhaktiya bhagavatiya kinchana. So, hava bhaktasya kuto mahaguna manoratena asati daivatobihi. One develops all the good qualities of the demigods automatically. Doesn't have to endeavor separately for this. Yashasti bhaktiya bhagavatiya kinchana. Automatically. But those, what is that? What? Harava bhaktasya how is that? Harava bhaktasya manoratena asati daivatobihi. Others remain hovering on the platform of mental Not speculation, just on the mental plane. The mental plane means accepting and rejecting. Accepting and rejecting, not fixed. Hovering, like a helicopter. Helicopters hover. Planes cannot hover. A plane drops like a rock once it no longer has lift. The jet engine or the propeller no longer providing it, it goes down. So this similar, when you're no longer motivated spiritually, utsaha nishchayat daryat tat tat karma pravartanat. These things have to be there. Another reason why we come and attend these programs, it is not just, like I said, to check the box. I remember one year when I went back to Mayapur after some absence, they used to have a book. All the brahmacharis ashram faces the Panchatattva pavilion. So everybody comes out, walks directly into the Panchatattva pavilion. There's a book. You had to sign the book. No signature, no breakfast. Or something like that. It wasn't exactly like that, but maybe a few times you get maybe you get 3 absences in a month. I don't remember the exact details. But one time I went there and the book was gone. I said, oh, finally they just decided to get rid of the book. But then I saw on the wall, and this is years ago in Mayapur, they had a fingerprint scanner. I'm thinking, that's pretty, well, I don't know what, sophisticated, but it's the same, because people were signing other people's names. That was the problem. I'm not getting up for Mangalarti today. Prabhu, can you just sign my name? So what's the solution? A fingerprint scanner. I thought, okay, let's see how that works. But these are artificial. These don't help you in spiritual life. You have to have the realization, just like, a person is sick with jaundice. Prabhupada uses this analogy repeatedly. He has no taste for the medicine. The medicine is sugar candy, mishri. You suck on it, and it restores your balance, your system from the jaundice. But it tastes bitter, because when you have jaundice, sweetness tastes bitter. Sweet things taste bitter. So it's not very palatable. So that saying is there. I don't know it's that what is nectar in the beginning is poison at the end. What is poison in the beginning is nectar at the end. So in the beginning, it's a little difficult to execute spiritual discipline. Rise early, attend the program. Yeah, you have to convince your mind. You have to be disciplined. This motivation is not always available to those whose minds are weak. But the more you chant the sweet names of Krishna, just like we're reading in Lilamrita, Bhavo Sadach, the sweet names, this is the actual medicine. Chanting the holy names. What are those holy names? Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Rasavajam Rasopyasya Param Jasvanavartate. So, anyway, so many lessons to be learned, so many experiences to be utilized in developing your Krishna conscious armory. You have to have a weapon for every situation. But the strongest weapon is sadhu sangha, sarva sastrakoy, lava macha sadhu sangha, sarva siddhi hoy. You don't get this anyplace else. Some people say, oh yeah, I'm coming to sadhu sangha. Sadhu sangha is once a year. That's not sadhu sangha. Sadhu Sangha is you living in the association of devotees. This is what's recommended in the Shastra. That's the best thing. Second best thing is you come every day as much often as possible. The idea is to eventually situate yourself so that you're always in the association of devotees. This is the ideal. It's not always possible. I mean, when you're a grahasta, you have to do whatever. You have to work. You have to work on it. But you should always be thinking, I'm only looking forward to the time when I can go and associate with the devotees. When will I be in their association? So we're very fortunate. We should be grateful for the opportunity to live under the shelter of the spiritual master and the deity. Prabhupada has not established these temples simply as places for eating and sleeping. We see that famous in Mayapur, he gave that description. He said, all the GBC, take care. And what did he mean by take care? That the temples don't become a place simply for material sense gratification, for eating and sleeping. Simply meant to save oneself from being victimized by the material energy and to serve, simultaneously become cured of the material disease. What is that material disease? Bhava Rog. Bhava Rog. And then you can go on. Your life will be, assured. Not this life, the next life. And this life is never assured. Padam, padam, yadvi padam. Any second, finished. But what you're developing now is your permanent asset, your future. Take birth, again, if one so desires, with the spiritual master, wherever he is at that time, or wherever Krishna is, in whichever universe he is. This is not a cheap thing. It's not like Maharaj was saying the other day about the signet ring in the Cracker Jack box. And then Maharaj had to explain what a Cracker Jack box was. So yes, it's not like that. Sometimes that's used in a negative way. When they say, like a person who doesn't know how to drive, they say, where'd you get your license? In a Cracker Jack box? So any questions, comments? Mr. Chaitanya.
Hare Krishna Prabhu. We have a question from Italy.
From who?
From Italy.
Okay.
How to distinguish the soul from the mind?
A very good question. By practice. Because in the beginning, it's very difficult to distinguish. In the material situation, there is no distinction. No one understands. Because ultimately the mind, the seat of the senses, is part of the subtle existence. And above that is the soul. So when one has actually practiced to use his spiritual intelligence by chanting and by hearing and by reading, then very quickly he sees that who is this other voice who is acting like what is the term that's used? Devil's advocate. Telling you to do something opposite. One time Prabhupada gave a very nice analogy. Maybe this will help. He said when a person walks to a high place, like a cliff, the mind says jump, and the intelligence says no. Okay? So that's intelligence. And intelligence is coming from the soul. It may be contaminated by the modes of material nature, but it originates with the soul. The mind originates with the material senses and body. And the mind of a dog, because we were in dogs' bodies at one point, but we no longer have the mind of a dog, although some people do. We have the mind of a human now. So the mind changes. and the intelligence can be covered. But once the intelligence is purified, Cheta Darpana Marjanam Bhavamaha Devaya Nirvapanam, then automatically one recognizes the difference between these voices. But it still takes practice, because sometimes a person doesn't distinguish. He has to know what is his real self-interest. Sometimes he thinks the mind tells him, the mind is telling me to do something very nice, by which I may get a lot of money. But is that in your best interest? Maybe that money is going to come by some illicit means, by stealing, right? You have this material intelligence. The mind says, yeah, it'll be very nice. Let me steal all this money. What's wrong with that? Getting money everybody needs money. And so there's justification. One thing, yeah, I need this money. It should be mine. That person doesn't deserve it. I should liberate it for my own purposes. So this is the mind. He doesn't think of anything according to reality, just based on some immediate ability to satisfy the moment. And so crazy people also cannot distinguish. A crazy person, whatever the mind tells him to do, he does. Tells him to jump in front of a train, he jumps in front of the train. Of course, that's the end of that. But sometimes it tells him to put somebody else in front of the train. We see in New York City all the time, crazy people pushing people in front of the train. Because they're crazy. The mind tells them to do it. Boom. So the intelligent person knows, no, don't do this. And that's the soul. And eventually the intelligence will lead you to take up the path of spiritual perfection. If you live long enough. If you meet a devotee, if you have Krishna Prasadam, if you get that lava matra, that moment, one moment's association. So by all means, don't listen to the mind. The mind tells you don't go to the temple, then you should say, why? That's intelligence. Why are you telling me not to go to the temple? Because what? Because the devotees there will tell me to chant Hare Krishna. They'll tell me I'm a nonsense. I don't want to go there and be subjected to higher knowledge. Why? Because that will diminish my material activities. The people, they avoid the sages and saints. Yeah. Same reason people avoid religion. They don't want any restriction. All religion has some benefit. The difference between man and an animal is religion. Because we understand that there's God. A religion without God is not religion. But any religion that has as the focus, the ultimate absolute truth, to whatever degree, then that there's some benefit. But the ultimate benefit is to know the supreme absolute truth. Brahmeti paramatmeti bhagavaniti shabdyate. So that is the benefit that we have, that no one else has. No one else has. So we're very fortunate. So we should study it carefully. We should hear from the spiritual master continuously. Continuously. Every moment, every opportunity, one should be listening to the spiritual master. You should have a tape. If he's in the kitchen, he should have a tape of the spiritual master playing. If he's getting ready in the morning, getting dressed, he should have a tape of the spiritual master. You should be listening. Whenever, even if he's doing his bookkeeping, you should have a tape of the spiritual master. It's not that, that you're ignoring it. This sound vibration is going through the ear into the heart, and it's having effect because it acts even without conscious effort. That knowledge will be there. This type of subtle, they have a marketing strategy. called subliminal. Everybody knows, right? Especially Noah, he knows all these things. Right? Subliminal. It means just below the level of consciousness. But the mind sees it through the agency of the eyes or the ears, whatever it is. Doesn't have to be there. They'll put something in an image that you don't see directly, but the mind sees it on that subliminal level. And it makes an association between, well, the famous one was the image of a woman in a glass of liquor that was disguised, but once you knew what to look for, it was obvious. But when you're just flipping the pages in a magazine, even if you don't stop to look at the image is embedded in your mind. So everything we see in the material world is subliminal in one sense. And it's making these impressions unconsciously for the most part. And then the mind gradually will act on them at some point. Because the fact that it's in the mind means that it'll be projected into the consciousness. This is how it works. So be very careful what you put in. Well, we've just said this many times. Psychology 101. What is that, Arjuna Nanda? Psychology 101? G-I-G-O. Garbage in, garbage out. Garbage in, garbage out. G-I-G-O. So you have to be careful what you, even the karmis say that. What do they say? You are what you eat. You are what you eat. Any other questions, comments? Yes, Chaitanya.
How do we know when we have the desire to accept more austerity in devotional service? Let's say fasting, full fast on Ekadasi, or chanting 32 or 64 rounds. How do we know if the blessing is already there for the activity, or if we have to go to a senior authority, spiritual master, and ask specifically for our case?
Well, good question. Generally, when you're living in the house of the spiritual master, he is your boss. And his representative is there to assist. It's not that the spiritual master goes around, although Srila Prabhupada is very expert and could do it, and in many cases did, management by walking around. That was his style. The style that he taught us. Management by walking around. No sit-down management. No micromanagement. No remote management. Management by walking around. So if you're assigned your task and you finish everything, and without any impediment, you chant. Prabhupada said, when asked, there's no time for reading, one devotee complained. What did Prabhupada say? Eat less and sleep less. He didn't say do less service. He said eat less and sleep less. So if you can chant whatever you want to chant, as long as it doesn't interfere with your service, then go for it. Why not? One should be chanting constantly, right? One can chant the holy name of the Lord constantly. But he can't do it artificially. He can't, we can't, Prabhupada condemned those who tried to imitate Haridas Thakur, sit in a solitary place. Srila Bhakti Siddhanta was very heavy about sitting and chanting in a solitary situation. So, in our line, in any case, these things are left for more advanced stages of life, when one is either in the sannyas ashram or close to it. Taking care of the cows. Kamrupa had plenty of assistance at the time. So he had the luxury of getting up, and because he had trained himself in this discipline. And it didn't interfere with his service. And he was very active. It's not that because he got up at midnight that he was tired all the rest of the day. No, he was very active. Taking care of the cows is not a service or an activity that you can do if you're lazy or tired. You have to be sharp. You have to be alert. And he did so many things, edit so many books, and prepare so many layouts and designs and so many things. He was always active and always preaching. So if you can do that, then no problem. But if you can't, then you do what the temple authorities, the spiritual master, because that engagement is authorized. Right? What's that verse? Can't think of it, but simply a disturbance. It will become simply a disturbance if one is not performing according to the directions of the scripture. What is that verse? Arjuna, what's that verse? Okay, we'll have to discuss it over prasadam. Yes, that's correct. Thank you, Chaitanya Nanda. So that, what's the whole loud? Shrut. I can't bhakti upatayava kalpate. Yes. Yeah. So if one is not following, it's simply a disturbance. Simply a disturbance. Okay, so, any other questions? Yes, Bhakta Noah.
Yeah, so thank you for class, by the way. Also, like, the digestibility of the information, too. It's very, like, you make it very relatable. One thing I have a question about is being outside of the ashram, like, how do you recommend about going with, like, engaging with material energy? So, like, I'll say, for instance, like, I might have to go home or something to, like, visit my mom for a weekend, or, like, I might have to go, you know, like yesterday I went to go, like, pick up some clothes that we're going to be using, like, to sell in the ashram, stuff like that. So just, like, I noticed, you know, just coming back the next day, like, my mind's already filling with old thoughts that I'd already, like, gotten past, and I'm realizing, like, oh, it's because I was, like, in Maya yesterday. Like,
very good question. Well, one thing is to be, you know, fully in the Bhagavad Gita, we see that verse, armed with knowledge, stand and fight. So if you're making the effort to read and chant, this will give you the protection when you have to interact outside the temple. You know, there's other, you know, we see that a lot of devotees like to listen to their lectures or their kirtans, just like everybody else in the material world. Everyone is in his own zone. He has his AirPods, his headphones, and they're in their own world. Well, devotees also have their japa mala. They don't need to have something else artificially. If they're just with their beads alone, Prabhupada said, this is your constant companion. You should always have your japa. And don't be afraid. Some people think, oh, I don't want to chant in public. That's why we have a bead bag, you know, specifically. You know, so that there's, you know, it has several functions. One is that, you know, someone doesn't become inimical or offensive when they see us chanting. They just see that this person is praying, and so that's there. So you have, if you need to listen to kirtan for whatever reason, you like that more than japa, then you listen to kirtan or a lecture when you're interacting. But the main thing is to have enough ammunition, spiritual knowledge, in order to defeat the mind as it presents, like this person was asking. as it presents so many alternatives to what you're trying to do spiritually. When it tells you, no, no, just go do this. You don't have to go back to the temple now. You can go back later. You can go hang out with your friends. You can do this. You can do that. No, that's the mind. One very easily sees that because it's not acting in your best interest. Remember, the mind is the best friend or the worst enemy. It's the best friend when it's helping you to remember Krishna, just like we're trying to remember that verse. Shruti Smriti Purana Adi. So the mind we can access. It's just it's in one sense it's a bit of an impersonal aspect. It doesn't serve any actual function unless you're trying to use it properly. Otherwise, it's just regurgitating all this stuff that the mind absorbs through the various senses. That's all it does. Just like a memory bank. It's like a memory bank that's not under your control. It just spits out, random thoughts, ideas, and that. No rhyme or reason, really. Just, you see sometimes people say, where did that thought come from? Because nobody knows. Where did that thought come from? Sometimes these thoughts are like these crazy people. The guy said, oh, my mind told me I had to kill this person. No sane person follows through on such a thought. But insane person do it all the time. Every day you read about some crazy person shooting up a place. You go, what happened? I heard a voice. And that voice he heard was his mind. But he didn't have sufficient intelligence to overcome it. He walked to the edge of the cliff. The mind said, jump, and he jumped. He jumped. End of story. So don't be the end of story. Don't listen to the mind. Listen to the intelligence telling you, go chant your rounds, go pick up your bead bag, go read a book, go do some service. Any other questions, Noah? Krishna will protect you when you go outside, Noah, if you want it. The whole idea is to want. That's the intelligence protecting you, is trying to guide you through this maze of material existence so that you don't get burnt. Just like walking through a path lined on each side by dangerous impediments, whatever it is, fire, flood. So you have to be careful. You should be as careful as any other material situation. When someone says, you see signs on everything. It's a danger, high voltage. You're warned. So you don't open the cabin and then touch the bus, the electric connection, because if I touch this, I'm dead. So you have to think like that, spiritual life. You have to think, if I engage in this nonsense activity, I'll be dead, spiritually. So that thinking is required, to think of at least a step or two ahead, to understand the consequences of my action. That's intelligence. Any other questions? Chaitanya?
I think there's another question here.
You have to make it bigger so you can see it. Yeah, you're talking right by the camera. You don't need the microphone. The camera has its own microphone.
Because this one is connected.
Okay.
By all the healing, kind through devotees, acts of compassion, how do we get compassion if everyone is rejecting a book?
Everyone is what?
Rejecting a book.
Okay, well, it depends on which book. We have, by great endeavor of the sages at Naimisharanya, and through the line of disciplic succession, we have access to an unadulterated chain of knowledge, unadulterated. It hasn't been transmitted haphazardly or contaminated by mental speculation or a desire for profit, distinction, or adoration. So only such literature, only such transcendental literature, all right, which is, we chant these prayers, before chanting the Bhagavatam. One has to be purified by some action. In Kali Yuga, chanting the holy names is the action which purifies us so that we are eligible to understand and appreciate transcendental knowledge. So if one has no access to such purification, then these books also won't help him. What to speak of other books? The heart has to be pure. The heart has to be pure. The first verse Lord Chaitanya left for us is the medicine by which we can achieve the highest level of spiritual attainment. But it all begins simply by chanting the holy name. Because in this age, there's no other way, there's no other way, no other way. And this has been made clear. And we've seen practically the result that very few other situations can claim success in Kali Yuga for their participants to achieve actual self-realization. The first concern is that we are not these bodies. And if we're thinking we're these bodies, then everything else connected to that, whether it's therefore because I'm born in this regional area, I can only subscribe to the book from this particular area or the philosophy from this particular area. So that is the first, that illusion is simply compounded more and more. One has to first become free from that illusion that I am this body. And once he's free, then he accepts knowledge as it is, not because it's coming from this source or that source. Raja Vijay Raja Guyam Pavichamidamuttamam Pratyaksha Bhagamam Dharmyam Susukam Kartamavim. This knowledge is the king of education, the most secret of, what is that? The purest knowledge. This knowledge is the king of it, the most secret of all secrets. The purest knowledge, because it gives direct perception of the self by realization, it is the perfection of religion. It is everlasting and joyfully performed. So that is the criteria right there. The king of knowledge, the purest knowledge, the most secret of all secrets, and is directly perceived. I don't have to tell you. I don't have to say you have to come to this location, to this temple, to this place. No. One can achieve this independently, individually, on his own, if he simply follows that same path of the sages. And they're not Brahmeti, Paramatmeti, Bhagavaniti, Shabdite. You will realize it in those three phases, just like that. In the same way, as the sages in the past have. And everyone, because it's practically realized, it is something which can be used just like a data set. People use a particular data set for analysis. And it has to be sufficient information in order for it to be usable. And so there are millions of people who have read this Bhagavad Gita and become self-realized. Self-realized means they know that I am not this body. I am spirit soul, aham brahmasmi. That cannot be said for any other philosophy. So unless someone understands that he is not this body, then he's not on the bona fide path. And we're not pushing that realization. When they walk in the temple, we don't say, hey, you're not this body. And by the way, you're not this mind. Or the senses. No. Gradually people will come to that realization. But we do help them by analogy, the same way Prabhupada did, to understand that point that I am not this body. I am spirit soul. I am the knower. I am the knower. The body is the field. Chetragya. I am the knower. You know? So many analogies Prabhupada gave. No one says I body or I mind. It says my body, my mind. I am the owner, but I am not this body. If the hand is cut off, I am still the same individual person. Okay, one interesting side point. I think we've mentioned this before about Disney. Everyone knows Walt Disney, right? Do you know Walt Disney? You know that guy? House of the Mouse, right? So, when he was approaching death, everybody know what he did? He had his head removed and cryogenically preserved. Frozen, still frozen. For a point in the future, supposedly when there would be a cure for his, I think he had cancer. And his brain, because he thought that I'm this brain. His brain could be placed back into another body. All right, who was that? It was Daksha, right? Got the head of a goat. But he didn't get the brain of a goat because the brain is not the same. It's just a repository of information. Just like if I take out your hard drive and put it in another hard drive, you can program it with whatever you want. So Walt Disney is there in the deep freeze now for, 50, 60 years, like that, waiting for somebody to be able to graft his head onto a cyber, some artificial body or something. Who knows? It's crazy, right? Because they think they're the body, and they think they're the mind, and they think that my existence is tied together to its brain. There's nothing to do with it. Okay, no more questions. It's 9:25. Come on. It says right here on the thing, it says 9 o'clock. Class begins by 8, ends at 8:50. Okay. And I have a meeting, by the way. I have to go upstairs to a meeting. Any other? That's it, right? No other questions? We can talk later. Srimad Bhagavatam.